Welcome to the House of Truth. Today we're resuming our series on the days of the kingdom. Last time, last time we looked at the death of Saul, and we saw just what a tragic it was, and how that really it was a story of failure from beginning to end. But but this brought about, of course, David. Now David's been hunting for Saul for maybe as long as 10 years, we saw. And this perhaps brings about, he's got some relief from Saul. He's done with Saul, but he's not done with the house of Saul. Or I should say the house of Saul is perhaps not done with him. And so today we're gonna talk about the fall of the house of Saul. There's this house that's what's left of his house after him and Jonathan and two of his other sons died fighting the Philistines. In 2 Samuel 2, verses 1 through 4, we read the following. It came to pass after this, that David inquired of the Lord, saying, shall I go up into any of the cities of Judah? And the Lord said to him, go up. And David said, whither shall I go up? He said to Hebron. So David went up, and his two wives also, Ahinoam, the Jezreelitess, Abigail, Nabal's wife, the Carmelite. The men that were with him did David bring up, every man with his household, and they dwelt in the cities of Hebron. And the men of Judah came, and they appointed David king over the house of Judah. And they told David, saying that the men of Jabesh Gilead, that the men were they that buried Saul. Now, Saul had rescued the people. Saul, the Philistines, they cut his head off, paraded it, and put his body up on a wall. And the men of Gilead came and rescued it in the body of Jonathan and his other two sons, and gave them a proper burial in Jabesh Gilead. And really, it was them repaying to some extent what Saul had done for them. They were the ones that in the fish, the Ammonite, came and said he wanted the right eye out of every one of them, with a reproach on Israel. And Saul heard of it, got angry, killed a couple ox, told everyone else, and sent peace to the ox, saying, if anyone doesn't come to me, I'm going to do this to your ox. And now he had a big army, and he went and rescued them. So they went and rescued his body in like manner here. And I bring it to your attention again. It's very relevant to what we're going to look at the day later. Abigail is noticed called Nabal's wife. The Carmelite is where she's from, the Carmel, the mountain of Carmel area. This other woman's from the valley below it, the Jezreelitis, the Jezreel Valley. But she's called Nabal's wife, but Nabal had died. She's a widow when David married her. It's also called David's wives. And we'll look at this a little bit of strange. In English, in modern American English, we probably said more like who had been the wife of Nabal or something like that. We'll look at why it's expressed that way later. Now, in 2 Samuel 2, chapter 2, verses 5 through 7, we read the following. David sent messengers unto the men of Jabesh Gilead, and said to them, blessed be you of the Lord, for you have shown this kindness to your Lord, even to Saul, and have buried him. Now the Lord showed kindness and truth unto you, I'll requite you this kindness because you have done this thing. Now, therefore, let your hands be strengthened and be valiant. For your master Saul is dead. Also, the house of Judah has anointed me king over them. Okay. Okay. So I perhaps I missed something important here. All right. Well, yes, they'd come to anoint him. Didn't say how long. We'll get back to that. Good. Okay. So David calls him blessed. Remember Gabal, the mountain that Saul died on. David cursed it. But now he's done this, and he gave a eulogy about the how the mighty are fallen about him and Jonathan, about Saul and Jonathan, and in the other way sought to honor Saul. Took every opportunity he could to honor Saul, who had been, even though Saul had been chasing him for 10 years, because the anointing had been on Saul. So, and now he's letting them know Judah's made him his king and wants them to be strengthened and be valiant, not be a not and because Saul's dead, but he's alive and he will take care of them. David will. So is the point of this. And just to refresh your memory if you don't remember. Hebron's down here, and remember, it's the city of the priest. It's also indicated by these little red stars in this particular map, one of the cities of refuge. All right, and that's where David is making his capital at the moment while he's ruling over Judah. And by extension, he's probably ruling over Simeon, because as we talked before, this is really should be a bunch of dots. Simeon just has these cities and little villages around them. There's all this pasture land in the middle, in between them, that actually belongs to Judah. So, but this one of the Levitical cities there in Hebron that Judah gave out of its cities, and it's a city of refuge as well. And now it's also the capital of of the kingdom of Judah under David. Now, in 2 Samuel 2, verses 18 through 11, we're going to read about who's king over the king over the rest of it at this time. But I forgot to mention Jabesh Gilead is way over here as well. Way outside the territory of Judah, but David's still inviting them to be part of the kingdom of Judah that's way over here. Because the Lord's made a promise to be king over all of Israel. But not all Israel's just ready to hand it over to him and follow him just yet. And here's why. In 2 Samuel verse 2, verses 8 through 11, we read the following. But Abner, the son of Ner, the captain of Saul's host, took Ishbosheth, the son of Saul, and brought him to Machanaim, and the king and made him king over Gilead, over the Asherites, over Jezreel, over Ephraim, over Benjamin, and over all of Israel. Ishbosheth, Saul's son, was 40 years old when he began to reign over Israel, and reigned 2 years. But the house of Judah followed David. At that time, David was king in Hebron over the house of Judah was 70 years, and the time. Okay. There's a little bit going on here, what's worth noting. Remember, Saul had been anointed by Samuel. David had been anointed by Samuel, both under the instruction of God. But Yahweh, however you like. But David's general is the one who's making Ishbosheth, the son of Saul, as the next king. And notice he's king over everything except Judah, as we mentioned. And over Gilead, and Gilead is where Jabesh Gilead is at. Jabesh in Gilead is what that means. Okay, so despite David's invitation, they are sticking with the house of Saul. Now notice his son's 40 years old when he began to reign over Israel. Well, Saul was king for 40 years. So his son was born when his king when began being king. And and if you remember when Saul was king, Jonathan and these others were already grown at that point. And he reigns 2 years over everything except the house of Judah. But what I want you to notice here about this is down here next. David was king in Hebron over the house of Judah 7 years and 5 months and 6 months. There's a 5 year and 6 month period. We'll perhaps talk about a little bit more. When the question is who's reigning over the rest of Israel during that time. So 7.5 months now. This significant guys way back here when the Philistines returned the ark, they held it for they returned it for half a year. This has been a half year down the way down now. The 6 months is about half a year as well. If I right, they held it 7 months, and this is 6 months. And a year can have 13 months. Three out of every 8 years do, and just a general rule of thumb, because it's based on lunar, because the moon the number 12 months new from one new moon to another is typically 354 days, and an actual solar year is a little longer. So now it's put us back at an even number of years here. So he's here at 3,078 years since Adam was formed out of the dust is where we're at. Keep our timeline accurate. Okay, so just to remind you where we're at. So it's been quite a while, and this is a fairly long period of time here. It's going to cover 6.5 years. We looked at lots of these chapters, and they cover just a few days or whatever, or maybe a number of chapters inside of a single year. But this one's going to cover 7.5 years period. These stories here today we're looking at. Now let's continue on 2 Samuel 2, verses 12 through 17. And Abner, the servants of Ishbosheth, the son of Saul, went out to Menachem from Gibeon. And Joab, the son of Zeruiah, and the servants of David went out and met together at the pool of Gibeon. And they sat down, the one on the one side of the pool, and the other on the other side of the pool. And Abner said to Joab, "Let them young men rise now and play before us." And Joab said, "Let them arise." And there arose, over by number 12 Benjamin that pertained to Ishbosheth, the son of Saul, and 12 of the servants of David. And they cut everyone his fellow by the head, and thrust the sword in his fellow side, so they all fell together. And that place was called Helkatha Zurim, which is in Gibeon. And it was a very sore battle that day. And Abner was beaten, and the men before Israel and the men of Israel before the servants of David. Okay, so what's going on here? What's going on here is a little a little bit of deception, really. Okay, and it's on Joab's behalf. Now he went to Menachem where they declared him king, and he goes back to Gibeon, where his father had grown up and where he'd always stayed to become effectively the royal city. And and Abner just goes back there. He's not pursuing David. He's not causing any trouble to the southern kingdom. He's just letting the thing be as just let it be, and really just trying to seek to live in peace. Well, Joab is plotting here. Notice he goes to Gibeon, goes he goes again back to our map. He goes into Benjamin's territory. And he goes there. And now this part here about play, it wasn't, he's basically challenging Abner to a battle with his hope, with when he comes there. Abner realized what he's there for. I mean, he's coming there with an army, an army of some size, into the capital city, the effective capital city of the house of where the house of Saul is. So this is an opening scrimmage that was not uncommon. It was not uncommon. It was not back in ancient times. In the opening scrimmage, that each side have a number of men from each side, and fight. And those would fight to give it, sort of an indication how the battle was going to go, and sometimes that would be the end of it. That one side would just say, well, just say, okay, what's super peace or whatever. Well, this scrimmage was very lopsided. Here, this field of strong men. Okay, the fill the rocks here, whichever you prefer, which is a little discreet on what that means. But anyways, Benjamin's losses are 12, Judah's are 0, and now the battle just gets on. It's just going on. But notice Abner's doing all this, and he's taking some servants of David, and David's not nowhere around. And we'll see the importance of that later. This is not something David was authorizing. He didn't tell Joab, go up and try to provoke a fight with Abner. We'll see. He's relying on the Lord to bring about what the Lord said he would bring about in his life, about being king over all of Israel. It's entirely the underhanded doing it, the underhanded doings of Joab, or Joab, as we'll often say in English. And David is unaware of it. But notice that his army's following Joab. We'll talk about this is problematic for David. We'll talk about that later, because notice the servants of David, not the servants of Joab. But Joab is effectively became the general of the army of Judah, even though he's not officially got that title yet. Pretty much everyone's treating him that way. The army has definitely got has their allegiance to him. And here's part of why. In 2 Samuel 2, verses in chapter 2 and verses 18 through 13, 18 through 23, we read the following. And there were 3 sons of Zeruiah there: Joab, uh, Abishai, and Asahel. And Asahel was a light afoot as a wild roe. Okay, as light afoot as a wild roe. And as Asahel pursued after Abner, he turned not to the right, to the left, from following Abner. When then Abner looked behind him and said, "Are you Asahel?" And he answered, "I am." And Abner said to him, "Turn you your side to the left or the right, and lay hold on one of the young men, and take his armor." But Asahel would not turn aside from following him. And Abner said again to Asahel, to Asahel, "Turn you aside from following me. Why for should I smite you to the ground? How then shall I put my face to Joab your brother? How he refused to turn aside, and wherefore Abner with the hinder end of the spear smote him under the 5th rib, and the spear came out behind him. He fell there and died in the same place. It came as past me as came to the place that Abner fell and died, stood still. Okay. Okay. This this Zariah is David's sister, and these are his nephews. And remember, it'll mention again Joab's the leader of the general of the army, but Abishai was the first of the second group of three of the mighty men, and Asahel was one of the 30 of the remainder. There's 30, I guess 37 altogether, counting Joab, 37 altogether. Asahel's in that group of 30, in that general group of 30. We looked at the mighty men of David. So these are, these are not just, and notice they're pursuing one. Asahel is determined to to kill Abner, and Joab and Abishai were as well. We'll see, but they just weren't as fast as fast as Asahel. A wild roe is a wild sheep. It could also be a wild deer. But the word could also be translated a gazelle, an antelope. It gives you the idea this guy was really fast afoot. And notice Abner's big concern about killing this guy. His brother Joab. He's concerned about having to face the wrath of Joab if he does this. How's he going to? And the guy won't do this, and Asahel's gaining on him. And this Abner makes a really quite incredible move here. He's an experienced warrior. He had no doubt that if they got, he would be able to kill Asahel despite being one of David's mighty men. And he kills him with cunning here. And what is about the hinder and the spear is these spears had on the other end. Here's the spearhead. This is a Greek hoplite spear, but the Israel's has a similar one. And on this end is a charge point or charge set point. So like if let's say a lion was charging at someone, and if the person just tries to hold the spear in their hand, or say a horse, someone on a horse, and they want to stab the horse would just knock it out. It would just knock it out of them. But so what you do is you set the charge point down the ground and thrust your spear down, face it quick, and the last one thrust it down. The horse didn't have time to stop to go, and they would run into the spear head and die. Us Abner, without turning around, sticks the spearhead in the ground when Asahel is too close to be able to react and turn aside quick enough, and points the set point for a charge right there in the spot under his fifth rib, which might go to the heart, would go to the lungs, and it was just generally considered an always fatal place to place a sword for a sword or spear to go through. And he does that. If you look at this, he does that without even turning around. He turned around. He turned around. He looked behind him, and saw he perhaps turn around. But when he sees that Asahel's not going to go, he lets Asahel get close enough where he's too close, where he's almost upon Abner, and Abner shoves the main point of the spearhead into the ground like a charge point, and uses the charge point. And notice it goes all the way through Asahel, all the way through him. I mean, it was really quite a move on his behalf, and this speaks of the military prowess of Abner. And it also says volumes that he's concerned about Joab despite that prowess. Now, he's not concerned about Abishai, who killed 300 men in one setting. we read, we looked for the mighty man. He's concerned about Joab. Because Joab is, we'll see, as we'll see, relentless and underhanded, we already seen here, and just a force to be reckoned with, and someone you don't want to be on their bad side. So we get the 2 Samuel 2, verses 24 through 28. We look and see what happens. You know, Joab, and we see that Joab and Abishai were also after Abner alone. Joab and Abishai pursued after Abner. The sun went down when they came to the hill Ammah, lifts up before Gaya, under the way of the wilderness of Gibeon. The children themselves gathered together after Abner, became one troop, and stood on the top of a hill. And Abner called to Joab and said, "Shall a sword devour forever? Knowest you not that it shall not that it be bitterness in the latter end? How long shall it be ere you bid the people return from falling their brethren?" And Joab said, "As God lives, unless you had spoken, surely in the morning the people had gone up, everyone from his following his brethren." So Joab blew a trumpet, and all the people stood still and pursued after Israel no more. Neither they fought they any more. Okay, Joab's answer here saying is they would have sat there and fought all night if he hadn't spoke up. That's what that means. Well, notice what, Abner's just shown his prowess in killing Asahel. He wasn't even concerned about Abishai. He was only concerned about Joab because of his ruthlessness and his cunning and his underhanded ways, as we shall see. But now he's given Joab reason to pause. And why is that? Because they're all on the top of a hill. And remember the thing how this has turned out before when the children of Benjamin are up on the top of the hill, like on the top of the rock Rimmon. They can fling a stone or shoot an arrow later, left or right handed, a lot of them, and just never miss. Not by a hand's mark, not by a hair's mark. And Abner's warning Joab basically, if you try to come up here, a lot of you are going to die in the process. So that's what his warner means. Yeah, Joab might win, but it's going to be a Pyrrhic victory, as it's called, where the cost of victory is so high, it was worse than taking a loss. And Joab recognizes that, and they're not, and they stop their pursuing. However, Abner doesn't trust him, isn't taking any chances here with Joab. He's going to put as much distance between him and Joab as possible. So here's what we read in 2 Samuel 2, verse 29 through 32. And Abner and his men walked all the night to the plain and passed over Jordan and went through all Bithron, and they came to Menachim. And Joab returned from following Abner. He gathered all the people together. They're like of David's servants, 19 men, and Asahel. And the servants of David had smitten of Benjamin, over the servants of David had smitten of Benjamin, of Abner's men, 303 score men died. So 303 score men died. And they took up Asahel and buried him in the sepulchre of his father, which is in Bethel. And Abner and his men went all night, and they came to Hebron at the break of day. Okay, so notice Abner's men walked all night to the plain. They went back to Menachim, way on the other side, not in Gibeon, close by, but way over on the other side over here. Here's Menachim's around here somewhere. We're shown kind of on the border of Manasseh and Gath. Up here again in a high area, in a fortified place where they were safe from Joab, it would have been foolhardy of Joab to have attacked him there. But he wasn't taking no chances at all with Joab. So notice that an 18 to 1 kill ratio, 18 for every man lost on David's servants. There's 18 killed on Abner's men. And thus they're all people of Benjamin on Abner's side. He didn't have time to get the whole Israeli army. But now, but now, the Menachem, he can gather all of Israel as well. So Joab is leaving this off for now. And they also went all night, not taking any chances again. They took Asahel, and they also went all night and came to Hebron to bury Asahel. They weren't, I mean, in Bethlehem. They went to Bethlehem first, and went down to Hebron, the rural city, where they could be safe from Abner as well, just like he had done. So Abner's really giving them pause with this masterful move he made with the end of that spear, really, and the fact he's going to have the whole army, and Joab realized, despite his large lopsided winnings here, he's just going to destroy the entire army of Israel if he keeps this up. So, however, that's not the end of it. That's not the end of it with Joab, because, like I said, he's vindictive and everything else. Now, but this is really just the beginning of this war. This war is going to go on for pretty much the rest of Ishbosheth's rule for 2 years. Now, it was a long war between the House of Saul and the House of David, but David waxed stronger and stronger, and the House of Saul waxed weaker and weaker. Under David were sons born in Hebron, and the first was Amnon, the son of Ahinoam, Noam, the Jezreelitess. His second was Chileab of Abigail, the wife of Nabal, the Carmelite. The third was Absalom, the son of Michal, the daughter of Tamai, king of Geshur. The fourth, Adonijah, the son of Haggith. The fifth, Shephatiah, the son of Abital. The sixth, Ithream, by Eglah, David's wife. These were born unto David in Hebron. And it came to pass that there was war between the house of Saul and the house of David, that Abner made so strong for the house of Saul. Okay. So this war has been going on for 2 years. The house of Saul has been losing it. But Abner is very loyal to the house of Saul, as we see here. Well, during this time while he's in Hebron, not necessarily during the 2 years, but during the 7.5 years, David already had he had married Michal before. I mean, before, which we'll talk about it later. He had picked up, when he was on the run from Saul, Ahinoam and Abigail, and now he's picked up 4 more wives. And notice one to the king of Geshur. Remember, Geshur is one of the places that when he was living with Akish, went against an enemy of the Philistines as well as the Israelites, part of the Canaanites that were supposed to be driven out. But he has taken his daughter to wife, and perhaps it indicates that she has become a follower of the living God, the king of Tamai, and this Tamai. It's political marriage as much as anything. Now, and the last one here, by Eglah, David's wife. They're all his wives. So David now has 7 wives, 6 right here, plus, of course, he had Michal before. So David, I guess, at this point has 6 wives, we could say, and he previously had Michal as his wife. So David's been, and one of the reasons why kings often have more than one wife, it wasn't just sexual lust, as some people think. It was also insurance. Henry VIII, perhaps, if he had been allowed to have more than one wife at the time, would have had less of them die under bad less of them die or be divorced. He just, all he wanted was one to produce a son for him, and when they couldn't do it, he divorced two. If I'm right, two, he killed two, and two died perhaps in childbirth or something. And Elizabeth was, Elizabeth, he did have a son eventually, but he didn't live long. Well, so the kings would marry multiple wives to make sure there was an heir to the throne. This wasn't just about sexual desire, but if you remember, the Torah said the king was not to multiply his wives, and David's, already done this here. And we'll bring that to a future lesson. But as we'll see, this is a huge mistake. It always is, as we saw with Abraham, with Isaac, with Jacob. I'm sorry, with Isaac, you didn't do that, I guess. With Abraham, with Jacob, end up with literally war in your own household, except it never is a good idea. But that's for another day. Let's continue on here with looking at what's going on in the house of Abner. Because remember, in the house of Saul, Abner's been very loyal to it. Here's what we read happens in the house of Saul, because that's about to change. And Saul had a concubine whose name was Rizpah, the daughter of Aiah, and Ishbosheth said to Abner, "Wherefore have you gone to my father's concubine?" And Abner was very wroth with the words of Ishbosheth, and said, "Am I a dog's head, which against Judah to show kindness this day to the house of Saul your father, to his brethren, and to his friends? Have not delivered you into the hand of David? Did you charge me today with fault concerning this woman? So do God to Abner, and more also, except as the Lord has sworn to David, even so I do to him, to translate the kingdom of the house of Saul, and set up the throne of David over Israel and over Judah, from Dan even to Beersheba." They could not answer Abner a word again, because he feared him. All right, so basically, he's accusing Saul's concubine. Often it was common not to let them remarry, because they've been the spouse of a king, and he's accusing Abner of, not really, well, some people might have even interpreted it as adultery against Saul. But we'll look at that later and get clarification on whether this was adultery against Saul, but certainly fornication with as far as concubine. And the implication is he's dishonoring Saul. He's disloyal to King Saul. And that's why Abner's so wroth with him. After continuing doing kindness to his father's house by not joining Judah and delivering him to the hand of Judah, showing his continual loyalty for 2 years of war, but he just ended them by handing Ishbosheth over. And now he's accused of disloyalty. That's really the root of Abner's wrath here. So because of that, he says he's going to. He knows. Now notice, the Lord had sworn to David. He knows the Lord has sworn to him, and they should have just handed the whole thing over to David 2 years earlier and avoid all this bloodshed. But Abner remembers the one who set up Ishbosheth. Well, he realized he's made a mistake here, and he's now saying he's going to repent and do what he knew the will of the Lord was all the time. And Abner's the king, but he's afraid of his general. And that is not uncommon, not just in scripture, but in history. Because what happens often is the army becomes more loyal to the general than to the king. And in Rome, the final emperors of Rome were all really puppets of the general. The general was not born in Rome, was of Germanic ancestry, and the Senate and the Roman Senate had ruled that they could never be emperor. But whoever was emperor was afraid to go against him, and he effectively ruled Rome anyways, until they decided just let the whole thing die. And these emperors all do what he said because they were afraid of him, because the army was loyal to him, who by this time in Roman history was mostly made up of soldiers they came from Germanic tribes, were more loyal to him than they were to the emperor. And that's what's going on here. It's not about being afraid of Abner because of Abner's military prowess. He's the king. He could try to call people to arrest Abner and stuff, but they're probably gonna be more loyal to Abner, and so he's just afraid to go against him. Now we're going to continue on here in 2 Samuel 3, verses 12 through 16. And we're going to see that Abner's plan, how Abner's going to put this, translate the kingdom over to David, his plan here, how it's going to work out. So we begin here we read this. Abner sent message to David on his behalf, saying, "Whose is the land?" Also saying, "Make a league with me, and behold, my hand shall be with you to bring all of Israel unto you." And he said, "Well, I will make a league with you, but one thing I require of you, that is, you shall not see my face except you first bring Michal, Saul's daughter, when you come to see my face." And David sent messengers to Ishbosheth, Saul's son, saying, "Deliver me my wife Michal, which I have espoused to me for 100 foreskins of the Philistines." And Ishbosheth sent and took her from her husband, even from Paltiel, the son of Laish. And her husband went along weeping behind her to Bahurim. And then said Abner to him, "Go and return." And he returned. Okay, so well, notice what we have here. Whose is the land? I mean, he's saying, he's indicating David's the king, but he'll hand it to the land to whoever Abner's saying, "I hand it to," because the army's loyal to Abner, more than anyone else, and he's going to persuade Israel to do this. But of course, he says, "Make a league with me." He's wanting to be that league with the king. He's going to be at least general over these 10 tribes, all these northern tribes that he's already general over. If David will make a league with him, and perhaps general over the entire army as well. So David is willing to do this. David is willing to do this, but he wants Michal's daughters first. This I'll give us pause, and we'll look at this a little bit later in detail. Because what's going on here is kind of strange to think about it. She's remarried. And this got to give us pause here. David's saying she's mine because I paid a price for her, but she's remarried since David. And if you remember, and we'll look at the history of that in a moment here, about this apparent conflict of her having two husbands, or what's going on here exactly. Because notice how Paltiel is called her husband here as well. "Deliver me my wife." Well, whose wife is she? David claims her because he paid a bride price for her. But nonetheless, this Paltiel is called her husband as well. And they come to the place called Chosen, or perhaps the young men's village, the young men. So he's going there, and also as the concept of weeping. Now notice who tells him to go and return. Abner, and he's afraid to quit doing this. He's going to quit crying. He might keep crying, but he's not going to be following her no more, behind her, weeping, because they're taking his wife from him. Again, whose wife is she? And we're going to look at that in detail because they both are claiming her. Well, let's continue on in 2 Samuel 3, verse 17 through 21. First, we're going to look at we're looking at this turning of the kingdom over to David by Abner as he had promised, and see how that works out his plan here. So again, in 2 Samuel chapter 3, verse 17 to 20, read the following. And Abner had communication with the elders of Israel, saying, "You sought David in times to be king over you. Now do it, for the Lord has spoken to David, saying, by the hand of David, my servant, I will save my people. I will save my people Israel out of the hand of the Philistines, out of the hands of all their enemies." And Abner also spoke in the ears of Benjamin, and Abner went to speak in the ears of David in Hebron all that seemed good to Israel, and that seemed good to the whole house of Benjamin. And Abner came to David to Hebron, and 20 men with him. And David made Abner and his men with him a feast. And Abner said, "I will arise and go gather all Israel and the Lord my kingdom and make a league with you, that you may reign over all that your heart desires." And David sent Abner away, and he went in peace. Okay, Abner convinced David said that to Ishbosheth, but Ishbosheth was afraid to go against Abner, as we said before. So Abner now has delivered this, and Ishbosheth knows he's going to hand this over to Abner, over to them, and there's nothing he can do about it. So, so Abner's promise is now David makes him a feast, They've made their league. Abner's going to Abner just needs to go complete it by reminding the people of Israel that they wanted David to be king before, anyways, and how David had delivered him, starting with Goliath, out of the hands of the Philistines and all their enemies. So he's going off after this feast to seal the league. The 20 men's his bodyguard. He's going off to tell Israel to bring about this peaceful. And David's looking for a peaceful solution to thing. He doesn't want a big civil war or civil war where he kills a lot of people from both sides so he can become king. He's looking for a peaceful way to do this, and Abner has provided him this right here. And everything looks good except Joab. 2 King, verse 3 through 20, verse 3, 22 through 25, read the following. And behold, the servants of David and Joab came from pursuing a troop and brought a great spoil with him. But Abner was not with David in Hebron, for he had sent him away, and he was gone in peace. And when Joab and all those who was with him were come, they told Joab, saying, Abner, son of Ner, came to the king, and he sent him away, and he has gone in peace. Then Joab came to the king and said, "What have you done?" But Abner came unto you. Why you have sent him away, and he is quite gone? You know, Abner, the son of Ner, they came to deceive you, to know you're going out and you're coming in, and to know what you do. Okay, notice Joab wasn't at the feast, and David, he was out there leading the army, pursuing a troop. Indicates some sort of troop from another kingdom that invaded Israel, and he has this great military victory. Well, this is where the problem. Even when the king's a military king like David, they can't be out. They can't be on the battle every battle. Particularly when it's ongoing, like it is, like they're having to do with pushing all these enemies out of the promised land. and securing places. So the general is the one so he has to rely on the general. He has to spend some of his time in diplomatic missions like he did right here with Abner, judging cases between people, the hard, settling disputes, so on and so forth, and making sure the kingdom is administered properly. There may be cases where he has to make the final say, the decision. Well, so the army is again, Joab's the one with the army leading it effectively, even not officially, effectively the general of the whole army of David, and he is livid that David had gone that Abner came and David had gone away. He would even more so if he knew that they made this league together. And that was his accusation that Abner is being deceitful and just came there to spy on him. Now, why Joab would make this accusation against Abner could be he's trying to discredit Abner and David's, but mostly it's because that's the kind of thing Joab himself would have done. And he's projecting it on Abner. He's projecting his character on Abner as if, Abner's a House of Saul duplicate of himself. And we will see that they're really not much alike. Well, we'll see what the words of David himself say about this thing. But first, we're going to look at this thing about whose wife is she. Both of these men claim her, and we're going to begin with, why we're going to look at David's claim here, and how Paltiel came to have a claim as well. Where this confusion began at, and we begin here in 1 Samuel 18, verse 25 through 28. We read about David paying the bride price for her. And Saul said, "Thus you shall say to David, the king desires not a dowry, but 100 foreskins of the Philistines to be avenged of the king's enemies." But Saul thought to make David fall by the hands of the Philistines. And when the servants told David these words, it pleased David the king's son-in-law, and the days were not expired. Therefore David arose and went, he and his men slew the Philistines, 200 men, and David brought their foreskins and gave them full tell to the king, of the king's son-in-law. And Saul gave him Michal, his daughter to wife. And Saul knew Saul, Saul, and knew that the Lord was with David, and the Michal, Shaul's wife, daughter, loved him. Okay, remember, when he killed Goliath, he already promised to give his wife, give his daughter to King's wife. But the older daughter was in love with someone else, and David just let it be. He wanted to marry someone that wasn't, didn't want to be married to him. Well, Michal did want to be married to him, and David definitely wanted to be married to her. I mean, so there'd be no doubt about the count. Wouldn't be going, looks like you're one short there. David brought twice as many as required. Okay, so he has paid the price twice for Michal to be his wife. Oh, and she wanted to be his wife. However, it did not their happy married days did not last long because of the mechanisms of Saul, Shaul, the father of Michal. We're going to read about those here remind you about those here in 1 Samuel 19, 12 through 17, and what it led to. So Michal let David down through the window, and he went and he fled and escaped. And Michal took an image and laid it in the bed, and put a pillow of goat's hair for his bolster, and covered it with a cloth. Then Saul sent messengers to David to take David. She said, "He is sick." And Saul sent his messengers again to see David, said, "Bring him up to me in the bed that I may slay him." Well, there should become, there was an image in the bed with a pillow of a goat's hair for his bolster. And Saul said to Michal, "Why have you deceived me and sent away my enemy has escaped?" Michal answered Saul, He said to me, let me go. Why should I kill you? Okay. Saul had planned to kill him. Michal learned about, and Michal's the one that alerted David. She's the one that helped that helped him escape, and she's the one that bought him time with this whole goat, this image. Remember, we talked about a person size teraphim, which is a statue. It doesn't have to be an idol, but usually they were. But just like there were images inside the Holy of Holies of angels on the wall, and there were the angels. You call them statues if you want. On top of the Ark of the Covenant, they weren't idols. They're only idols if you worship them. So for whatever reason, she has this big terracotta man-size image there in her thing, and she put that in there. Where it's an idol, or perhaps they or far thought, instead of destroying like he's supposed to, he destroyed one of the Philistines, thought it was beautiful and gave it to her as a gift. Who knows? But David, the point here is David, she has helped David escape because she's in love with him. But she is afraid of Saul. As we saw, he was already losing his mind. His hatred of David was causing him to be irrational, try to kill his own son, etc. So she accuses David of threatening to kill her if she kept him from escaping. And she lied out of fear of her father, whose mind was unstable. Okay, well, this leads Saul to believe that that Michal his whole thing with her was she loved Saul, she loved David, wanted to use her as bait. David's gotten in the way, and she now believes Michal doesn't love him anymore. So as a result of that, this is what happened here as told to us in 1 Samuel 25:44. And Saul had given Michal his daughter, David's wife, to Palti, the son of Laish, which is of Galim. Okay, Palti and Paltiel are two different spellings. It's the same name, though, okay? It's like saying Daniel and Danny. All right, Palti's a little shorter nickname version. So Saul thought Michal hated David. So she gave him to this other guy who was loyal to him. He didn't have any use for her anymore. His whole purpose was to use her as bait to get David killed, and that had failed. So now Saul, being the king, was totally capable of giving her, saying he annulled as far as the government was concerned, her marriage was annulled, or she's divorced, or whatever, and can legally marry this other guy. And notice there's no mention of a bride price here to this guy. He's just giving her to him. Rather, she may not have wanted to. It didn't matter. It didn't matter to a man like Saul at all. So, but notice she's still called David's wife when he gives him to this faulty. So again, this confusion even starts there. She's given this guy's her husband, but she's still David's wife. So whose wife was she? And what was her status while she's married to Faulty? Well, now we're going to get the answer to this question here. Look at the background, how this predicament came into being. We're going to start here looking in the Torah in Deuteronomy 24, verses 1 through 4. We're going to look at the law of divorce. And this should help us start unraveling it. When a man takes a wife and married her, has taken a wife and married her, and it come to pass she find no favor in his eyes because he has found some uncleanness in her, then let him write her a bill of divorce and give it in her hand and send her out of his house. And when she is departed out of his house, she may go and be another man's wife. And if the latter husband hate her and write her a bill of divorcement, and give it in her hand and send her out of his house, or if the latter husband die, which took her to be his wife, her former husband which sent her away may not take her again to be his wife. After that, she is defiled. For that is an abomination for the Lord. You shall not cause the land to sin, which the Lord your God gives you for an inheritance. Okay. If a man takes a wife and marries her, now find some uncleanness in her. And Messiah, Yeshua said, we're given two examples of that uncleanness is. Yeshua made it very plain that is fornication, sexual immorality. Okay, sexual immorality. Or it can also mean if she started worshiping their God or something like that nature, like we're told when two people were formerly when you had a couple that were they're formerly worshipers of idols, and one comes to faith, that they're to stay he's to stay married to us. That one's to stay married to their spouse, try to win them over to Messiah. But if they leave, they're free to remarry. Okay. Now, in Israel's case, they're already worshiping God and turned to idols. They're committing spiritual adultery. And they're in the land, except they would be killed, but if that went practical, you could divorce them from that as well. So it's adultery, either physical or spiritual, either adultery against her husband or against God himself. So in those circumstances, he could do this. And now a woman was to be killed, she's caught in adultery, but there'd be two witnesses. Here's another case where this may happen. The man may give her a divorce instead of bringing her before the judges, or maybe he caught her alone by himself, didn't have another witness. But he knows she's guilty, so he can. This is why divorce is given. Alternative to stoning, perhaps in some cases, doesn't want the kid that they had children, didn't want his children not to have the mother, to have a mother, whatever. Or perhaps he doesn't have enough witnesses. They don't want to keep, but she's plenty doesn't love him anymore, and he wants, so he can get out of the marriage. But she don't want to be married to him, so he can let her go by giving her a bill of divorce. But it's totally up to him. Notice the wife cannot divorce her husband. It's only the power of the hand of the man. Her husband doesn't have to let her give her one. Hebrew, it's called a get, or in modern Hebrew, and he has to give her a get. Now the rabbis will teach they can force him to give her a get, but nowhere in the Torah does it say we can force him to give her a get. He is plainly in his hands entirely. She can whine, cry, whatever, so much she hates being married to him and blah blah blah, and he can still say, no, you're staying here. But if he gives it to her, now she can remarry. And notice he can only give it to her again, remind you, for fornication, for adultery, physical against him or spiritual against God. Now, if she gets remarried after that, and then the other husband divorces her or dies, she cannot go back to her former husband. She's defiled, the Hebrew word tameh, related to tameh, at least tameh, so unclean, literally. But the Greek word akathartos for unclean means uncleanable from pollution. She's polluted, the more modern, up to date word. She's polluted. She's polluted with respect to her first husband by the second husband, because their man has went into her, and that makes her defiled. So she cannot go back to him regardless. It's over once she marries someone else. Okay, now with this law of divorce in context, this is the law of divorce that God gave through Moses. We're going to look at Mark 6, another case where it's a question of whose wife is she, in Mark 16, 17 through 18. And we're going to get a very clear answer to this question right here. For Herod himself had set forth upon John and bound him in prison for Herodias' sake, his brother Philip's wife, for he had married her. And John said to Herod, "It is not lawful for you to have your brother's wife." Okay. Herodias had gotten a divorce under Roman law, but she had filed not Philip. And remember, God's law said, and when John says lawful, he's not talking about Roman law. He's talking about the law of God, the law that God gave through Moses. And Philip is the only one who could give the divorce. And he didn't give it. He didn't consent. He wasn't willing to give this. And notice Herod's his brother. Now, Philip had died. Someone said, well, Philip, I heard someone say, well, I thought Philip was dead. Well, Philip had been dead and hadn't raised and didn't have any seed, which he didn't. Herod would have had to marry her, or his other brother, um, Agrippa, would have had to marry her. Well, this is Herod Agrippa. Anyways, would have had to marry her. But that would have been totally in line with the law, according to the law that God gave. So Philip's alive. He's not giving her a civil divorce. She has a legal divorce from the Roman government. Just like Michal, Michal, Michael, like Michal. Michal had a legal divorce from the government, from the king Saul, or an annulment or something of the sort. Didn't matter. David hadn't given it to her. Philip hadn't given this one. And notice it's Philip's wife. She's still Philip's wife. It's not for you to have your brother's wife. Herod is in the Roman law is the legal spouse of Herodias. But under God's law, she is still the wife of Philip. Brother. Okay. Okay, we're gonna read this here now. In Roman and Paul's gonna summarize this all up for us here with their important aspects. Remember, we brought up Nabal, Nabal, Abigail, Nabal's wife. I mean, Nabal's wife. You know, she's married to David. But Nabal was dead, and she was a widow. She was Nabal's widow. And here's what in Romans 7, verse 2-3, Paul makes this clear for us exactly what the status is in that situation. If a woman has a husband, is bound by the law to her husband as long as he lives. But if the husband be dead, she's loose from the law of her husband. If while her husband lives, she be married to another man, she should be called an adulteress. But if her husband be dead, she is free from that law, so she is no adulteress, though she be married to another man. Okay, if Nabal was still alive, she'd be her and David would be married in adultery. Notice that if she's married to another man, she's an adulteress. They're married in adultery. But Nabal was dead, so she's not. So when she marries another man, David, she's not an adulteress. Marriage is as long as both of you shall live, until death do you part. Well, until death they depart. She's married to Nabal and loyal to him, as we saw. But then she married David, and there's no adultery going on. But in this case, David's alive. Michal is married to another man, Phatiel, and that is an adulterous marriage. She's married in adultery. She's married legally, She's an adulterer. She's committing adultery against David, and so is Phaltiel. And this is true today too. God's word does not change. His laws do not change. They cannot be repealed by the state legislature, nullified from the bench, or legislated out of existence from the bench. His laws are forever, they're permanent, and they do not change. Anyone that is married, that any woman who was not given a divorce by her husband because she was playing the whore on him, and use King James language, whoring around on him, whatever you want to say, committing adultery against him, or went off and died adultery against God, and then marries another man, her and that other man are both committing adultery as long as they're married. They're married in adultery, and God will judge them. They will not enter the kingdom of heaven. We're told no adulterers, no one committing adultery will enter the kingdom of heaven in Romans 10:9. You know, I feel so like, well, what are you supposed to do about this situation? Well, what happened here with David? David had her return to him. He ended this adulterous marriage. He wasn't remarrying her after he didn't give her a divorce, then remarry her, breaking what God saw. He never gave her a divorce. She was always his. And he brought an end to this adulterous relationship. And if you're in an adulterous relationship like that, you need to get out. And that means divorcing your current spouse under the law, American law, I'm saying, or the law of man, and returning to your husband who never gave you a bill of divorce. It's in his power, and it will always be in his power. And there's nothing you can do to change it. And if you're a man who's married a woman who perhaps she saw a divorce to marry you, like Herodias, but her husband did not initiate the divorce, she divorced him, you are committing adultery. And you will not inherit the kingdom of heaven unless you repent of that. You have to divorce her and get away from that. Just like in Nehemiah's day, the men who married idol worshiping wives had to divorce those idol worshiping wives, even though they had children by some of them, so they would no longer be committing spiritual adultery against God. It would let them into idolatry, as it had their forefathers. So this is a very serious issue. And you'll say, well, we've been married 10 years, 20 years, whatever. Well, Phaltiel was married 10 years, sir. The length of time doesn't change the situation. If you are married in adultery, you've got to repent, or you're not going to inherit the kingdom of heaven. God is not mincing words. He's not mocked. When he says something, he means it. And I feel for your children if you have them. My parents weren't married in adultery, but they divorced when I was young, and it was terrible. I will say it. But not as terrible as them going to hell. So please, do what's right in the eyes of the Lord if you're in that situation. Now, we're going to return here to 2 Samuel 3, verse 26 through 29. And when Joab was come out from David, he sent messengers after Abner, which brought him again from the wall of Sarah, but David knew it not. And when Abner was returned to Hebron, Joab took him aside in the gate to speak with him quietly, and smote him there into the fifth rib that he died, for the blood of Asahel, his brother. And afterward, when David heard it, said he, I and my kingdom are guiltless for the Lord forever from the blood of Abner, the son of Ner. Let it rest on the head of Joab and on all his father's house, that there not fell from the house of Joab one that is an issue, as a leopard, or that leans on the staff, or that falls to the sword, or that lacks bread. Okay. Now, Abner is left. Said he was said he was in a house, was in the city of refuge, but he wasn't. He left. Joab called him back to there. And Joab, is totally deceitful. Turned aside to speak with him quietly. Perhaps Abner believes he's, you believes he wants a position in the army, or perhaps even to inquire about if he can be maybe he'll be the chart and over and Abner be under him, or some such arrangement. He believes Joab is speaking to him in peace. And David, again, has no idea what Joab, who's effectively the general of the army, now not officially yet, is up to. And when he finds out, he's absolutely abhorred. Again, I want to bring out Abner was not in Hebron, as our very will teach, in the city of refuge, and went outside of it. He was already outside it and returned to Hebron. He had not. He had been afraid of Joab, knew he was underhanded, but he returned nonetheless, and it was very foolish of him. And again, perhaps he would, like David, just want to have peace. Israel quit fighting Israel. Judah quit fighting Israel, quit having the civil war going on between them, and just bring an end to all this war and have peace. And perhaps thought Joab wanted the same thing, but nah. Joab is like one of them generals who always wants war going on, because it props their position, makes them, because once war ends, generals tend to fade from the public eye. So he's got that war is good mindset, and he wants to bring an end to Abner, and for the blood of Asahel, hasn't forgiven him. He's vindictive and deceitful. The thing, as he accused Abner of, who's been nothing but noble, and his loyalty to Saul, the kingdom of Saul, his loyalty in trying to end the war peaceably and hand the kingdom over to David, as he knew the Lord wanted. So David wants everyone to know it, and he curses Joab and all his father's house. So that would be Abishai as well. Remember, Zerah is David's sister, and she's married. He married, someone, of course, that wasn't one of his brothers. And notice this curse is generational. Not fell from the house of Joab. What is an issue? When it's a leper. An issue's not leprosy, but similar, and it can cause you to also be put out of the camp. You're unclean as long as you have it. Leans on a staff, someone who's lame on their feet. That falls on the sword. That either dies in battle, or sometimes people fall on the sword, suicide, like we saw with Saul, fall on their own sword. It's going to die a violent death, or is going to lack bread, be begging. So we see David curse again, bring about a prophetic curse. Now, I want to stop there for a moment about this generational curse because there is a way in Scripture to break this, at least to some degree, into years. And it's in the book of Daniel, where Daniel says, both us and our fathers have sinned against you, and we brought this curse upon ourselves, and so on and so forth. If you want to break a generational curse, because here's an example of one in Scripture, it's a real thing. How you get out from under it is you repent for not just your own sin, but the sin of your father, your fathers, grandparents, so on and so forth, the whole line. Admit that they've sinned against God and brought the curse that your house, the house that you were born in, brought this curse upon itself. So, but David here, but if they do not do that, this curse will remain on them. Because God does lift the generational curses we've shown before. In the millennium, he'll lift the one off of Simeon, where he won't be scattered in Levi, where they'll all be together, no longer scattered, with their own land as well, not just living in cities. He's gonna do it with Levi and Simeon. So we know God can reverse these. No one can make something that God can't reverse. But unless Joab's individual family members can have this lifted off them by doing what I said, because God can lift off any curse he wants to. But otherwise, it's going to remain on him. Now we're going to continue on here in 2 Samuel 3, verses 30 through 34. Read the following. So Joab and Abishai, his brother, slew Abner because he had slain their brother Asahel at Gibeon in the battle. David said to Abner, all the men that were with him, rend your clothes and gird you with sackcloth. Mourn before Abner. And King David himself also followed the bier. And they buried Abner in Hebron. And the king lifted up his voice and wept for the grave of Abner. All the people wept. And the king lamented over Abner, said, died Abner as a fool dies? Your hands were not bound, your feet were not put in feathers. As a man dies for wicked men, so fell you. And all the people wept over him. Okay, again, remember, he returned to Hebron, and now they're burying him there in what's currently the royal city of David. It's acting as David's capital. They're burying him there. And notice he's in Hebron. Very rare for someone to be buried in a city. It's only done for people of as a show of great respect for someone. That grave is unclean, so usually they're outside the city. Be a little fence around it, whatever, a large monument. And Abner, he died as a fool. He had known how Joab was. And as Abishai also slew him. They went 2-on-1 with this guy. They'd seen his prowess when dealing with Asahel. Perhaps Abishai started first from behind while he's talking to Joab. He fell before wicked men. They didn't capture him. They just deceived him. But he died a fool's death because he wanted to believe that peace could happen. Well, remember, he was on his way to go bring all of Israel, on his way to do what he promised David, to bring all of Israel under the hand of David peaceably. But now that's not going to happen, which is why this 5.5 years continues. Because And we're going to continue on here. David wants everyone to know he had nothing to do with this. And we read this, we continue reading about that here in 2 Samuel 3, verse 35 to 39. When all the people came to David to eat meat while it was yet day, David sware, saying, "Do so God to me, and more also if I taste bread or aught else, for the sun be down." All of it, notice if it pleased them, as whatsoever the king did pleased all the people. And all the people, all Israel stood that day that it was not the king of the king to slay Abner the son of Ner. And David said unto his servants, "Know ye not that the prince of the great man fallen this day in Israel? And I this day am weak, though anointed king. And these sons of Zariah are too hard for me. The Lord shall reward the doer of evil according to his wickedness." So, so notice again, he brings up the fact of these sons of his sister. All right, these three sons, and three of that 37 that were listed out. We talked about the leader of the leader of his army and the 36 mighty the two groups of six, the remaining 30 mighty men. Out of that 37, three of them belong to belong to there. So the name means like the bomb of God. Okay, Tzura Yah, Tzura meaning bomb. So usually it brings comfort, but these men bring no comfort at all. It can also be translated the tribulation, the wounded. Okay, and notice this. He acknowledges everyone; they all understand he had nothing to do with this. But now he's not going to be able to convince them because he's dead. And notice what he testifies about these two sons. Now, why didn't he? They did not kill him. They did not kill Abner under the law, under the law of the city of refuge with the avenger of blood. I mean, this was just flat out murder, really. He didn't die. They didn't die in battle like their brother had. This was just revenge killing. It was just murder. But notice he's even though he's anointed king, the army's is with Joab. And Abishai, remember, killed 300 men at once, even though David killed Goliath. They're too hard for him together. And what do you do when you have an enemy that's too hard for you? I mean, even David is like Ishbosheth had been afraid of Abner, is somewhat afraid of Joab. You turn him over to the Lord. You're going to let the Lord take vengeance on him, and he will repay. There'll be an opportunity for revenge, an opportunity to make things right. But it's not this day. David, the army's the army is on Joab's side. It'll cause a civil war inside Judah itself if he does this, and perhaps be deserted, and the whole mess goes out. Well, let's finish up here with the fall of the House of Saul in we read 2 Samuel 4 in our last section. Start with verses 1 through 4. And when Saul heard that Abner was dead in Hebron, his hands were feeble, and all the Israelites were troubled. Saul had two men that were captains of the bands, The name of one was Baanah, and the name of the other was Rechab. The sons of Rimmon, a Bir, a Bir, Birathite of the children of Benjamin. For Beerot was also reckoned to Benjamin. And the Beerothites fled to Gataim and were sojourners there unto this day. And Saul's son, and Saul's son, and Saul's son, and I'm sorry, and Jonathan, Saul's son, had a son that was lame in his feet. He was 5 years old when tidings came of Saul and Jonathan out of Jezreel. His nurse took him up and fled, and it came to pass she made haste. He fell and became lame. His name was Mephibosheth. Okay, so when these tidings came out of Jezreel, taking him out that he was dead, and remember the Philistines invaded and killed many people. She ran for her life to save the son of Jonathan, but somehow he fell. He's 5 years old. Fell what? Perhaps out of a window. We don't know. Wasn't far enough to kill him. It was far enough to leave him lame. His feet, his legs got broke, whatever. They never healed right. And this Saul's son is Ishbosheth. That's his hands are weak, and all of the Israelites are troubled. The ones who weren't down with David, they're concerned there's going to be a war. That Joab was dealt underhandedly with Saul, and quite frankly, they don't want to be under Joab. I mean, it's quite dealt underhandedly with Abner. I'm sorry to say. And they frankly don't want to. They don't want to deal. They don't want to be. They don't want him to be their general. Is really the bottom line. That's why they're so troubled. And Abner's not there to convince them to come to David because Joab has killed him. Well, let's continue on there in 2 Samuel 4, verses 5 through 8. And the sons of Rimmon, the Beerothite, and Rechab and Baanah went and came out about the heat of the day to the house of Ishbosheth, who lay on a bed at noon. And they came there to the midst of the house as though they would have fetched wheat. They smote him under the fifth rib, and Rechab and Baanah his brother escaped. And when they came to the house, he laid on his bed in his bedchamber, and they smote him and slew him, and beheaded him, and took his head and got them away through the plain all night. They brought the head of Ishbosheth to David to Hebron, and said to the king, Behold the head of Ishbosheth, the son of Saul, your enemy, which sought your life, and the Lord has avenged my lord the king this day of Saul and of his seed. Okay, so you've got these two sons here. And remember, they're living in this other city. They're soldiers in this day. They ran off to this other town, and they're living there among them. Sort of a picture of Jews living among Gentiles, in years, centuries to come later. Sort of a miniature picture of that. They're not living in the place land God sent them. And these two are devious to no loyalty whatsoever. There's that fear of Joab and not wanting to be there. So they kill. They figure David's going to come for Ishbosheth. Now Abner's out of the way. They're great general. So they kill him, hoping to get a reward, and they bring his head to David to show they killed him. We're going to look at David's response to this in 2 Samuel. We finish here in 2 Samuel 4, verses 9 through 12, the rest of the chapter. And David answered Rechab and Baanan's brother, the sons of Ramon, the Beerothite, and said to them, as the Lord lives, who has redeemed my soul out of all adversity. When one told me, saying, behold, Saul is dead, thinking to have brought good tidings, I took hold of him and slew him in Ziklag, who thought I would give him a reward for his tidings. How much more when wicked men have slain a righteous person in his own house upon his bed? Shall I therefore shall I not therefore now require his blood of your hand and take you away from the earth? And David commanded his young men, they slew him. They cut off their hands and their feet and hanged them over the pool in Hebron. They took the head of Ishbosheth and buried it in the sepulchre of Abner in Hebron. Okay. David did not react as they had hoped, to say the least. When this Amalekite had come, the son of an Amalekite, that his father had been allowed to live in Israel because he'd come to worship God. We talked about that, why he'd be allowed to do that as a stranger among them. Hadn't got circumcised, wasn't counted as if he was native born, but was a worshiper of God. But his son, Saul was badly wounded and asked him to kill him, and he did, and thought David would reward him for that. And David killed him for not being afraid to touch the Lord's anointed. Well, this is even, Saul had become an enemy of God and stuff, but his son had done no such thing. His son had never waged war against David. Abner, who was under him, never waged war, never started this war. Joab did. And these two are wicked. As these two are wicked like Joab and Asahel. I mean Abishai. But David's not. They're not too hard for David. He's not afraid of them. They don't. They don't have this position. And so David kills them. Has them killed. You notice they cut off their hands and their feet. Why? Because they cut the head. They cut the head of Ishbosheth and hang them up over the pool in Hebron. Hung them up over this. Curses everyone that hangs from a tree, hung by their necks. Okay. Now Ishbosheth, the head of Ishbosheth, notice buried with Abner. Remember, Abner was the cousin of Saul. He was the nephew. He was the son of Saul's uncle. This would make Ishbosheth Saul his cousin. Ishbosheth would be, a second cousin. But buries him there in this royal, showing again David's respect. David had hoped to bring this all about peaceably. He waited on the Lord, and that reason it takes 5 more years, because it could have been done in 2 years without the mechanisms of Joab. And then these two. There is no king over those other tribes now. There's no they don't have a general. They don't have a king. There's no one, single person David can bring this about diplomatically with. The Lord's going to bring it about some other way, and it's going to take 5 years. And this, is no different than life is today. How many times has something of great benefit been taken away from a nation because of the selfish ambitions of a few who did not fear God or were willing to do wickedly, secure their position to get to make they keep their position important, to gain the gain reward for their wickedness, as it were, shortcut their way to fame and fortune by doing something like this. We need to do things the right way, the Lord's way, all the time, or it will, at the very least, delay the good thing the Lord would have for us. At the worst, it will cause terrible disaster. And we'll look at our next lesson, how this 5 year delay of David ruling over all of Israel finally comes to an end when he becomes king over all of Israel. Until then, next week, shalom.